The dust came first. That fine, silting kind that clings to your eyelashes and buries the world in gold haze. It came off the high ridge in long ribbons, fluttering like torn parchment across the sky, and then, through the shimmer, came the sound of hooves. Not heavy like a freight wagon or hurried like a sheriff's chase. No, these hooves were determined but tired, striking the earth like someone too proud to dismount but too worn to push harder. She appeared through the dust like a figure stitched from the earth itself. Leather satchel across one shoulder, wind-split hair pulled back with a scrap of red cloth, and on her face, something between exhaustion and defiance. The horse beneath her was a strange one, not bred from local lines. Its coat shimmered in patches of gray and bone white, its mane long and tangled, and its eyes wide, almost human with wildness. That horse looked like it remembered fire. No one said a word when she came into the hollow of town. Not at first. The blacksmith paused mid-swing, hammer still in the air. Two boys playing marbles froze, one with his shooter held like a sin half committed. At the edge of the saloon porch, a man spat tobacco juice onto the steps and muttered, "Ain't seen a thing like that since the war." She didn't ask for water, didn't ask for help. Just pulled the reins, dismounted slow, favoring her right leg, and led the beast toward the old corral at the far end of town where strays and outlaws both ended up when no one else wanted them. The stable hand, a boy not yet 16, gawked openly. "That thing yours?" he asked, half smirking. She nodded once. Quiet. Then spoke. "He needs rest. Feed. Not too much grain, he's not used to it." The boy laughed. "He don't look used to nothin' civilized." "I'll pay," she said, pulling a silver coin from her satchel and pressing it into his palm. He looked down, blinked, then called out to someone inside. From the dark of the stable stepped a man built like a stone chimney, tall, ash-stubbled, with arms like carved wood. The ranch foreman, or something close to it. He eyed the horse, then her, then back again. "We don't board freaks," he said. "He's fast," she replied, wiping her brow with the back of her sleeve. "No doubt. Fast don't mean worth feed. Or risk. I just need a place to sleep for the night." He didn't answer, only turned and walked back into shadow. That's when another voice came, low and even, from the far end of the fence. "Let her stay if it outruns mine." She turned. Slowly. The speaker was leaning against a fence post, half-shaded under the brim of a black hat worn soft at the corners. His boots were dusted but well-kept. His face was sun-browned, the kind that didn't smile often, and didn't need to. He didn't move when she looked at him. Just kept watching her, like he already knew what she'd say next. She met his gaze a full beat longer than needed. "Tomorrow," she said, "at dawn." He nodded. "No saddle. Just hooves." "Deal." And just like that, her place was set. Not accepted, not welcomed, but tolerated on condition of speed. That night she slept in a hayloft, curled near the window slit where moonlight poured in like memory. The horse paced below, restless, snorting like it had something to prove. She didn't cry loud, just once, briefly, the kind of sound you make when a dream you didn't dare have slips away before you can reach for it. Below her, the town rolled into its usual hush. The saloon emptied. Lamps dimmed. Coyotes howled from the far mesquite. And in the bunkhouse across the field, the quiet man sat sharpening a knife slow, staring into nothing like he was waiting for dawn to speak first. When the morning came, it came fast, like it was rushing them both toward something they couldn't dodge. She was already saddled when the rooster crowed. Though her saddle was old, barely stitched at the seams, the horn cracked and leather patched in places with what looked like pieces of an old satchel. She rode like she didn't need the gear anyway. The man came out without ceremony. No audience, no posse, just him and his horse, a deep brown gelding, thick-necked and calm-eyed, bred for war, not dance. It blinked at her steed like it knew this wasn't about ground covered, but pride measured. They lined up at the edge of the long field. The boy from the stable climbed the fence to watch, wide-eyed. No words were exchanged. No gun to start them off. They just went. Her horse didn't bolt, it launched. As if waiting for a reason to trust again. It didn't move like the others, didn't follow lines or lean into turns. It moved wild, unpredictable, like water spilled down a canyon. His gelding stayed steady, gaining ground on the straightaways, losing it on the curves. They cut through brush, kicked up clouds, startled birds into flight. They raced not toward victory, but toward some kind of understanding. At the halfway mark, the town had gathered in silence. By the end, no one cared who won. What mattered was that neither gave up. that she didn't break, that he didn't hold back. When the horses slowed, both slick with sweat and sides heaving, she looked over at him. Mud speckled her face. Her braid had come undone in the wind. Her lips were cracked, her eyes fierce. He nodded once. That was all. She swung off her mount and walked it to the trough, whispering something into its ear as it drank. Behind her, the stable hand muttered, "Damn horse really can run." More than that, the blacksmith said from shadows. She didn't flinch. She wasn't given a welcome after that, but she wasn't denied a place either. She was shown to the bunkhouse with the tin roof and the loose door hinge. Left alone, not because they liked her, but because she earned the space. By dusk, she was brushing down her horse with a cloth torn from her own dress hem. She moved slow, with care, the way someone does when they've had things taken from them too many times. The quiet man approached, holding a metal cup of water. He didn't speak, just handed it to her. She took it with both hands and drank, without looking up. He started to walk away. "You knew he'd lose," she said, voice dry as gravel. He paused. "Didn't turn. He's the fastest I've got," he replied. "But that horse of yours, it runs like it's trying to forget something." She looked at the fading light. "So do I." And that was it. He walked off. She stayed by the horse long after the moon rose. She didn't unpack, didn't sleep, just waited for something to come for her, or someone. But nothing came, only the wind. And in its hush, for the first time in years, she started to believe maybe she could stay. The days that followed didn't welcome her with warmth. They accepted her like the desert accepts a storm, cautiously, with quiet eyes and the brittle patience of those who've seen trouble arrive wrapped in soft skin before. She kept to the edges of town, where the noise was thinner and the judgment less sharp. Every morning before the sun fully split the sky, she rode out beyond the fences, the pale horse beneath her gliding across the hard-packed dirt like it was born to escape. No one asked where she went. No one followed. But she returned each evening covered in the dust to places no one else dared to name, with silence wrapped around her like a shawl. The townsfolk called her the girl with the ghost horse. Some said she came from a burned-out ranch near Carson Valley. Others swore she was an outlaw's widow, running from blood. Truth was no one knew, and she was an offering. Her hands were never idle. She mucked stalls without being told, fixed a broken gate hinge, cleaned her saddle with a care that suggested more reverence than ownership. She spoke little, nodded often, and met stares with level silence. There was no room in her for pleasantries, only the hard work of staying unnoticed. But he noticed. He watched from the fence-line, from the barn roof, from behind the steam of his evening coffee. The quiet cowboy with cold dark eyes and boots worn smooth by miles. He never spoke first, never asked her anything. But somehow, she found herself drawn to the calm gravity of his stillness. He was a man who didn't reach for things, and that alone made her feel safe. One morning, she came back later than usual, her shirt torn at the shoulder, a bruise swelling under her eye. Her horse was bloodied too, nothing fatal, just long scratches like it had run through thorn brush in the dark. She brushed the injuries clean without flinching, but her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. He was. That night, after the others had turned in, he knocked once on the bunkhouse door. She opened it, expecting a warning or maybe a question she wouldn't answer. But he only held out a strip of clean linen and a tin of salve. "Stitchin's inside if you need it," he said, voice low as dusk. She took it without thanks. But her eyes softened just for a moment, and he saw something break open behind them, something not fragile but tender and old. The salve stung. The silence stung more. But she cleaned the wounds and pressed her back to the cold wall and told herself, again, that she wouldn't stay. But she didn't leave. Days passed, then a week. One evening, as the wind picked up and the sky threatened thunder, the old blacksmith called her over. He'd seen her ride, how her horse responded like it could read her mind, and now he asked her to help break a new colt, a jittery bay with too much spirit and not enough sense. She didn't answer with words, just stepped into the pen, slow as a sunrise, and waited. The colt bucked and spun, testing her. But she didn't chase. She stood, still as fence post, whispering soft nothings. Eventually the colt came. Not because it was broken, but because it wanted to. The blacksmith shook his head. "Ain't seen a touch like that since the war. You got more in you than just hurt." She looked away. The compliment sat uneasy on her shoulders. That night, she found a bridle hanging on her bunk rail. Old but polished, the leather worn to silk. A small copper plate on the side stamped with a name not hers. She took it to the barn. Found him there, brushing down his gelding by lantern light. "You dropped this," she said. He didn't turn. Just said, "Didn't drop it." "It's not mine." "It is if you want it." She held it in her hands a long while, then set it gently on a bale of hay. "I'm not staying," she whispered. "Didn't ask you to." She didn't sleep well that night. Dreams came, full of galloping hooves and smoke, of men with hollow eyes and hands like iron, of ropes that weren't for livestock. She woke just before dawn, breath shallow, heart clawing her chest. Outside, the wind had shifted, carried the scent of something familiar. Not memory, something older. She rose and dressed without thinking. Saddlebag already packed. She was ready, always. But when she stepped out into the early light, the air stopped moving. A rider approached from the east trail. Dark hat, thin smile, horse too clean for this land. The kind of man who left behind things with bruises. She froze. He saw her before the others did. Lifted his hand in a mock wave. "Well, I'll be," he drawled, dismounting like he owned the ground. "Thought I lost you back near Rawlins. But here you are. Just where you shouldn't be." Her horse reared behind her, sensing the tension. She stepped between them. The saloon man leaned against his post, eyeing the stranger. "Friend of yours?" "No," she said, but her voice cracked on it. The stranger smiled, all teeth. "I came for my horse." No one moved. The blacksmith set down his hammer. The stable boy took a step back. "You left her tied half-starved in a fire-gutted pen," she said. "She's not yours anymore." The man chuckled. "Everything I touch stays mine. Eventually." Then the cowboy stepped out from the barn. Not fast, not threatening, just calm, like a storm cloud that hadn't decided where to strike. "You should go," he said. The stranger looked him over, unimpressed. "Didn't catch your name." "Didn't offer it." The moment was thin, like a fence wire strung too tight. The stranger squinted, assessing, then smiled wider. "I'll be around. Let you say goodbye proper." He turned, mounted, and trotted off. Not fast, not gone. She stood still, fists clenched at her sides. The horse nuzzled her arm, as if to remind her she wasn't alone. The cowboy didn't speak, just waited. "I thought I'd outrun him," she said finally. "You did," he replied. "But sometimes they don't chase with feet. They chase with shadows." She looked up at him. "Then I'll burn mine, before it catches me." And this time he nodded. That night she didn't pack. Didn't sleep either. She sat beside her horse, bridle in her lap, and watched the stars like they might offer answers. And just before dawn, when the wind came again, she whispered to it. She didn't say goodbye. She said, "Let him come. I'm not the same girl he left behind." And somewhere out in the dark, the quiet cowboy kept watch. The morning broke hard, windless, too still for comfort. It was the kind of hush that pressed down on the town like a held breath, the kind that came before something had to give. Birds didn't sing. Doors stayed latched. Dust swirled low, as if the ground itself was unsure. She didn't ride out that day. Instead, she waited. Sat on the fence rail beside her pale horse, boots dangling, fingers running through the beast's mane like a nervous prayer. Her shoulders were stiff, her eyes drawn to the eastern trail where the horizon always seemed too wide and too empty. He hadn't come back last night, the stranger, but he hadn't left either. He was waiting, somewhere just outside the line of sight. The kind of man who lived in the creases between safety and threat. The kind who never knocked, just stepped over thresholds like they were suggestions. The quiet cowboy didn't speak much that morning either, but his presence lingered. Near enough to be seen, far enough not to crowd. He fixed fence posts that didn't need fixing. Rode perimeter twice. Checked the rifle by his bedroll even though the lock hadn't been touched. By mid-afternoon, the saloon doors opened with a groan. The stranger walked in like a man with time to waste and no fear of spending it. He ordered whiskey, lit a cigar with a match struck off another man's boot, and asked questions with a smile that never reached his eyes. By sundown, the blacksmith was spitting into the fire. He's circling her, waiting for something. Ain't right. "She don't belong to him," said the stable boy. "No," the blacksmith replied. "But she did once. And that kind don't forget what they think they own." She stayed outside the bunkhouse, wrapped in a blanket of silence. The pale horse kept close, grazing, restless. The sky turned lavender, then bruise purple. A single star blinked through. She watched it without blinking, like it might fall, and take all her worry with it. He found her there just after the last of the sun bled away. He said he came for the horse, the cowboy said softly. She nodded. He didn't. You gonna run? She took a breath. Slow. Heavy. Not this time. He stepped closer, boots crunching gravel. His presence was steady, like the earth, unshakable but never loud. You want to talk about it? She almost laughed, but her voice came out like smoke from a dying fire. There was a ranch south of Carson. Big. Mean. Men drank before breakfast and worse after. I was hired on to cook, maybe clean. That's what they told me. She paused. Her hands clenched around the edge of the blanket. But the rules kept changing. First it was, don't talk back. Then it was, don't talk at all. Then it was, you stay where you're told. He said nothing. Didn't move. One night, they decided they wanted more than stew and clean boots. I ran. Took the only thing that could carry me fast enough to make it out, her. She gestured to the horse. She was chained. Near starved. Didn't like me at first. Bit me twice. But we understood each other. Silence settled like dust between them. I thought if I made it far enough, I could stop looking over my shoulder. I thought no one would follow me across the desert for a horse. They didn't follow for the horse, he said quietly. They followed because you left. Her breath hitched, but she didn't cry. Not now. I'm tired, she whispered. Tired of running. Tired of being afraid. Tired of being reminded I belong to someone else. You don't, he said, voice firm now, as if trying to carve it into the sky itself. Not to him. Not to anybody. She turned toward him. Her face was pale, drawn, but her eyes held something fierce. Then why does it still feel like he owns the air I breathe? Because he taught you to believe it. The wind stirred then, faint but real. Her horse raised its head, ears twitching. The cowboy reached into his coat, drew out the bridle she'd once left behind, and held it in his palm, like an offering. You said you weren't staying, he said. I know, but you did. She looked down at the leather, worn but strong. The copper plates still shone faint in the starlight. I didn't think I deserved something that lasted, she murmured. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. You do. She took the bridle, not like she was claiming it, but like she was accepting something heavier, something true. A noise cut through the stillness, hoofbeats. Distant, deliberate. One rider. The horse snorted. The cowboy's hand dropped to his belt where his sidearm rested, untouched but ready. She didn't flinch. I won't run, she said again. He nodded once. Then I'll ride with you. They stepped out together, across the corral toward the road. The saloon porch creaked as townsfolk leaned forward watching. Not interfering. Not helping. Just waiting to see which way the wind would blow. The rider came into view, dark hat, dark grin, rifle slung casual across his back, like a joke half told. He slowed his mount, but didn't stop. Well, ain't this sweet, he said, voice oily. Two misfits playing house. She didn't speak. Didn't step back. You came for the horse, the cowboy said. The stranger's smile faded a notch. And her. She ain't yours. She was. That's close enough. She isn't now. The stranger's hand drifted toward his belt. Not fast, not threatening, just a warning. The cowboy didn't move. His eyes stayed steady. You draw, he said softly, and I bury you where you fall. The stranger hesitated. That smile flickered again, unsure now. He wasn't used to being challenged by men who meant it. He looked at her, at the horse, then at the quiet man beside her who hadn't blinked once. Well, he said, feigning a laugh. No sense dying over a half-broke mare and a girl who don't know her place. You're right, the cowboy said. There's no sense to it, but I will. The silence pressed again. Then the stranger wheeled his horse around with a snap of the reins. You'll regret this, he called over his shoulder. She stepped forward. Her voice carried farther than she meant it to. No, I won't. He didn't look back. The dust of his departure lingered long after he vanished. The cowboy turned to her. He'll think about coming back. I know, but next time we won't wait. She nodded, and for the first time, she reached for his hand, not to be saved, but to share the weight. That night, she stood in the barn long after everyone had gone to bed. Her horse slept curled in the straw. She held the bridle close, fingers tracing the copper plate. She hung it on the stall door. It wasn't a symbol of ownership. It was a promise. And far across the plains, the wind shifted again. She looked out into the dark and whispered, "I'm not his. I'm not anyone's. But I am mine now." The stars didn't answer. They didn't have to. The weeks that followed settled like soft rain after a long drought, quiet, slow, and necessary. She didn't leave. Not because the stranger hadn't returned, but because something had shifted deep inside her, like a door she didn't know was locked had finally creaked open. She worked from dawn until the stars blinked on, always moving, always doing, not because she needed to prove anything anymore, but because her hands had finally found peace in their purpose. The townsfolk, once tight-lipped and wary, began to nod when she passed. The blacksmith left out an extra tin cup for her by the well. The stable boy asked her advice when a mule refused to walk straight. Even the saloon man offered her coffee one morning, without comment, without price. They hadn't changed who they were. They just started seeing her for what she was, a woman who wouldn't bend and wouldn't break. The quiet cowboy never said much, but his presence grew larger in her days. Sometimes they rode out at dusk together, not speaking, just listening to the hush of hooves and the hum of wind in the sage. There was no rush to understand each other. No fire, no frenzy. Just stillness. And in that stillness, something stronger than love began to take root, something patient and alive. One morning, as early mist curled along the valley floor, she found a colt loose near the outer fence. It was copper-colored, half-wild, and nearly impossible to catch. 2 men had tried before and failed. It bolted from ropes, bit at hands, and reared like it was born from thunder. But when she stepped into the corral, something in her presence made it stop. She didn't chase, didn't shout, just stood there, palms open, eyes steady. It took 30 minutes, maybe more. But eventually, the colt walked to her, inch by inch, until its trembling nose touched her fingers. She didn't grab it, didn't try to tame it in one go. She whispered instead, something no one else could hear. And the colt stayed. The cowboy watched from the rail, said nothing. But when she turned, he gave her the smallest nod. The kind that held whole conversations inside it. The story of the copper colt traveled through town fast, like dust on the wind. Folks started calling her the Whisperer. At first, she hated it. Names had always felt like cages. But this one was different. It wasn't about what she had been. It was about what she did. About what she'd become. One night, she sat by the barn door sharpening a small blade, her horse asleep behind her, the sky full of stars that pulsed like old songs. The cowboy came over, carrying something wrapped in cloth. He sat beside her without invitation, unwrapped the bundle, and revealed a piece of leather, worn but sturdy. "I found this in the old trunk," he said. "Was my brother's. He carved the pattern himself." The leather was shaped for a saddle pommel, etched with a wildflower and a trail of stars. She ran her fingers over it like it was a relic. "He ever get to use it?" The cowboy shook his head. "Made it before the winter, he didn't come back." She didn't offer pity, didn't say sorry, just placed it gently in her lap. "You think he'd mind if I finished it?" she asked. "I think he'd be proud." They sat like that until the moon climbed high, the silence between them soft and full. Then the storm came. It started small, just a rumble out west, too far to mean anything. But by morning, the sky had turned a slick gray, and wind swept down from the hills in long, moaning gusts. Thunder rolled, lazy and deep. The rain came in spits, then sheets, then walls. At first, everyone hunkered down, covered windows, closed shutters. But by mid-afternoon, the flood warnings came. The south pens were already filling. Cattle were spooked, and someone had left the back gate open. It was chaos, the kind that stretched men thin and made boys into men before sunset. She didn't wait for orders. Threw on her coat, saddled the pale horse, now leaner, calmer, and loyal, and rode out into the storm. Mud clung to everything. Rain soaked through to the bone. The wind screamed. She found the trapped calves near the bend in the dry creek, which wasn't dry anymore. Water surged like fury, carrying branches, debris, even a broken gate from upstream. The calves cried, stranded on a small rise, cut off by rising current. She didn't hesitate. Dismounted, tied the horse to a high root, then waded in. The water fought her every step, claws at her legs, pulled like it wanted to drag her under. But she reached the rise, tied the first calf with rope, eased it back across, one horse command at a time, then another, until her body ached and her hands bled, and her boots were lost to the river. By the time the last calf crossed, the creek was a roaring serpent. She nearly fell twice. The townsfolk had gathered on a ridge, some shouting, some frozen. And then she slipped, went under, vanished. Time broke open. The cowboy was off his horse before anyone saw him move. Into the water, boots and all. Found her in the current, clung to a rock with one arm, the other cradling something small and squirming. A calf, the runt, she wouldn't leave behind. He pulled her out. They didn't speak. She didn't cry. He just held her there in the rain, both of them soaked, shivering, and silent. Later, wrapped in blankets beside the barn, steam rising from their clothes, she looked at him. "I stayed," she said, as if hearing it for the first time. He smiled, faint but real. "You did." The next day, when the skies cleared and the land shimmered under sun, she found a pocket knife left on her saddle. The blade was small, the handle carved with a windflower. No note, just presence. She rode out at dawn. Not far, just enough to let the horse stretch its legs. She wasn't running, just remembering how to breathe in peace. When she returned, the townsfolk didn't watch her like a curiosity. They greeted her like kin. A little nod here, a lifted hand there. Even the blacksmith grunted something close to praise. She stepped into the barn and found the copper colt waiting for her. No rope, no halter, just waiting. She approached slow, reached out, and this time it bowed its head. That night, she carved her name, just her first name, into the wooden beam above her horse's stall. Not to claim it, not to mark territory. To say, "I was here. I stayed." The cowboy came in behind her watching. She looked at him. The soft light from the lantern caught the edge of his jaw, the quiet in his eyes. "You ever get tired of the silence?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not when I've got someone to share it with." She didn't answer, just stepped close, and leaned into him just a little. Not for shelter, but for truth. Outside, the wind whispered through the dry grass. And far beyond the town, in some other life, the girl who once rode into dust with nothing but a wild horse and a heart too full of scars, she vanished. In her place stood a woman who had nothing left to prove, only something to live, and maybe, in time, to love. The stars blinked overhead like old friends, steady and watching. And the pale horse, once unwanted, lifted its head and neighed into the night, free at last and home.